keyboard mechanical. 100 a minute, I type and that's factual. So I'ma get back at you. Yeah, all of y'all talking about Christmas is magical, but I hope you're encrypted. But I don't even care if it's 256-bit, cause I'ma get past it. Y'all don't know yet I'm bad shit. Better watch out, you better go high. I'm coming to town, you see what I type. No running away, cause I am the character you can't escape. Nobody gon' catch me. None of y'all ever gonna get past me, and no one gonna know what the patch be. Such a bad breach, I'm too nasty. Now I'm coming right for the magic. I hope it was fun while it lasted. Now Christmas is mine, and the fact is you can't patch this. I'm a savage, and now they all call me a mean one, Mr. Grinch. Yeah, the heck I is.
Guess what day it is? Day number 9 of Advent of Cyber, which means we have a new activity, new objectives, and a new challenge. If you are new to the channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, so whenever I post a new video, you are notified. If you are new to TryHack me, go ahead and hit the link in my description below to go ahead and join the challenge and also learn any new objectives within cybersecurity where you are interested in. Without further ado, let's get into today's challenge.
All right, so today we will be getting into GRC. If you are not familiar with GRC, it basically stands for Governance, Risk, and Compliance, and that is basically a whole another set of cybersecurity, a whole nother role, a whole nother sector within cybersecurity that is important, but it's just not as technical. It kind of covers our industry standards, policies, procedures, and things like that, just to help an organization or a company stay up to date and make sure that they are compliant. So without further ado, let's get into today's challenge. So, McSkitty and Glitch want to hire an e-discovery company to process some forensic data for their investigation. They have invited bids from third parties for this purpose, and 3 companies have bidded for the project. McSkitty and Glitch now need to do a risk assessment on all 3 of these companies to identify the one with the least amount of risk so that they can move forward. All 3 companies were required to fill out a questionnaire based on which risk assessment will be done. So, if you are out there and you're trying to get into cybersecurity, but you're not really a technical person, you can get into the field with GRC. So, you just have to understand industry standards, kind of know a little bit about cybersecurity from a technical standpoint, and just know all the basic things that you need. And then you'll just have to know more about what is risk, how to perform a risk assessment, security assessments, and things like that. But if you are the non-technical person and you want to get into IT, this is the role for you. So don't think you have to know how to do all the bells and whistles of a computer, know anything about what an attack box is, how to perform any form of hacking techniques. You are in luck. So, what is GRC? It is governance, risk, and compliance, and it plays a crucial role in an organization to ensure that their security practice aligns with their personal, regulatory, and legal obligations. There are a number of laws, regulations, and policies, and even federal standards that, depending on what your company does, you have to apply to those standards to maintain compliance within your organization, or you can face certain fines or penalties for not being compliant with those. So let's take a look at some examples in the financial sector. So we have the Reserve Bank regulations. In most countries, banks have to adhere to the security regulations set forward by the country's reserve bank, and this ensures that each bank adheres to a minimum security level to protect the funds and information of their customers. Another one that's really important is data protection. As banks hold sensitive information about their companies, this may be their social security number, your birth certificate, um, credit card information, really anything that can identify you from a personal standpoint that should maintain private and confidential. This is what we're talking about. We want to ensure that customers' data is protected, and in the event of any data breach or anything like that, the customer and the company is still protected. We don't want anyone to be victim of identity theft or a credit card scam or anything like that. So, what is governance? Governance is the function that creates the framework that an organization uses to make decisions regarding information security. So, governance basically is the creation of an organization's security strategy, policy, standards, and practices in alignment with the organization's overall goals. So this is going to ensure that any standards, any policies, any procedures that you have within the organization, this is the creation of those. So now we want to go on to risk. So risk is the function that helps to identify, assess, quantify, and mitigate risk to the organization's IT assets. So basically you would rate risk based on a number most of the time from 1 to 5, or you can do low, medium, high, or even critical, just depending on the organization and how you all do your risk. So now we go into compliance. Compliance is the function that ensures that the organization is adhering to those external and even internal regulatory and industry standards. For example, our most common one would be NIST or ISO 27001, but we also have GDPR law as well as PCI DSS and HIPAA. There are a number of regulatory and industry standards that we must apply to from a security standpoint and also federal standpoint. So now let's get into the introduction of risk assessments. Before McSkitty and Glitch can choose a company they want to handle their forensic data, first you have to be able to do a risk assessment on these particular companies to kind of understand what risks would they give to their company if they decide to go into business with them. What kind of risks are they going to run into? And they kind of want to choose one that kind of minimizes the business risk as a whole. And they don't want to go with something that may kind of put them in a situation where they're putting their own self at risk by going with a company that maybe doesn't protect their data, doesn't have any encryption in place or something like that, or maybe isn't even compliant with those industry standard laws. So we have to do what's called a risk analysis against these companies to help us decide which one is less likely to have a data breach or issues that could cause disruption to the investigation. So, when performing a risk assessment, every business main goal is to generate revenues and profit. And for most businesses, cybersecurity does not directly contribute to the revenue generation or profit maximization. However, businesses also want to spend money on the cybersecurity side to avoid the risk of revenue being lost due to data breach, or even reputation loss due to a cybersecurity attack. So most businesses will spend money in that area to kind of protect themselves to mitigate that risk of a cybersecurity threat. So we have an example here of a risk registry, and basically a risk registry is what tracks the progress of risk mitigation and all open risks. So as we can see here, we have a risk number with the risk name, which in this case would be an unpatched web server. We have a description of that risk. The web server has not been patched in at least 4 months. When has it been last updated? The likelihood of realization on a scale from 1 to 5. the impact if realized on 1 to 5, and then you get assigned a risk score and then a risk owner. So in order to assess a risk, you kind of have to identify what is the risk, what is the risk that will what is the risk to the company that can cause the company to have a impact on their reputation or even a revenue loss based on a cyber threat. So we can have something, for example, an unpatched web server. If we have a web server that's unpatched and a cybersecurity threat takes advantage of that risk or that vulnerability, and for instance, one of our websites get taken down that we use as our main form of business, that website has now lost its availability, which means we can't reach our customers, which means our job is basically not being done, which means we can't make any money. So in that case, we are at risk to having that cybersecurity threat happen. So once we have identified the risk, now we have to assign what is the likelihood that this risk will materialize. So we assign a number to to quantify this likelihood, often on a scale from 1 to 5. So improbable is so unlikely that it might never happen. Remote is very unlikely to happen, but there is still a possibility. Occasional is likely to happen once or sometime. Probable is likely to happen several times. Infrequent is likely to happen often and regularly. We may notice that we are trying to quantify the risk. We still don't define exact quantities of what constitutes several times and what constitutes regularly. And the reason is that the likelihood for a server, which has a very high uptime requirements, will be different from server to server that is used infrequently. So therefore, the likelihood scale will differ from case to case, from asset to asset. So now once we have identified the risk and the likelihood of the risk, now we have to assign an impact. So, for example, if there's a public facing web server that is unpatched and gets breached, what will be the impact on the organization? Well, as I gave you that example before, if we have a web server that's unpatched and our site gets breached, our company gets breached, our system is down, our customers aren't able to access our website, maybe for whatever reason our customers' data has been also compromised, now we're in a situation where our customers are unhappy. We have a reputation loss. We aren't making any money, and we can't function properly as a organization, which is a very critical part of what we do on our day-to-day job as a business. So, in that case, we would rate this from us on a scale similar to likelihood, often from 1 to 5. And in this case, this would be informal, which is very low impact, low, which is impacting a limited part of one area of the organization's operation, medium, which is impacting one of the organization's operations completely with major revenue loss, high, impacting several parts of the organization's operations, causing significant revenue loss, and then we have critical, which is posing an extremely high threat to the organization. So then in the last step of a risk assessment, we just have risk ownership, and this basically is determining what person in your organization will take ownership of this risk. Risk assessments are not only done internally, but they're also done as third party risk assessments as well. So if us as a business or us as a person wants to maybe have some business with another organization externally or another application or another vendor, we also have to perform our own risk assessment against that company to be able to understand what risks do they pose to the company. From an internal standpoint, internal risk helps a company understand the risks that they have within their own walls. And for instance, if we're preparing for an audit, we want to ensure that whatever we're not complying with or whatever risks we have to determine, do we want to mitigate those risks or accept those risks moving forward. So for example, if a company finds that its software is outdated and it can prioritize updating it to prevent potential attacks, and internal risks help with those. So we can identify weak spots in our security, we can direct resources to the most important areas, we can stay compliant with security rules and regulations. And why we want to do these against third parties is just so we can evaluate the risk that comes from working with this other company. It does not pose a bigger or better risk to our organization, and we don't want to have a strong foundation as a whole within our organization and then we have a weak link as far as a third party vendor or business that we're working with. So we also want to ensure that we're doing business with other people that are also up to date, compliant, and also secure. So now let's go ahead and put this knowledge to the test, and let's start the static site attached to this task by pressing view site. All right, so we will be assessing 3 vendors based on their responses to security questions. And for each vendor, we will review the vendor's responses to each security question, identify potential risks based on their responses, and add them to the risk register. And we will, for each risk, provide a clear description of the risk, rate the impact from 1 to 4, 4 being the highest, and rate the likelihood 1 to 4, 4 being the highest, and the risk score is automatically calculated by multiplying impact times likelihood, and then the vendor score is the sum of all risk scores for that vendor. Our goal is to identify the vendor with the lowest total risk score. All right, let's see. So, our first vendor being Bronze Worm, we want to identify their first risk. So, let's go to question 1. So, data in transit and data at rest needs to be encrypted at AES encryption as a requirement for this project. What type of AES equipment does your company use for data in transit and at data at rest? If you guys don't know what data in transit is versus data at rest, basically data in transit is kind of basically what it sounds like. Data in movement. So me sending an email from myself to you or a text message from myself to you, that is data in transit, that is data in motion, that's data that's going from one person to another, and it kind of has to go through some loopholes to get from me to you. Data at rest would be something like something that's on a flash drive or external hard drive, something that's not really being used at all unless you calling for it or you want to extract it. So an AES just a encryption method, something to keep that data secure, whether it's in transit or at rest. So the vendor answered none for data at rest and none for data in transit. So just off the bat, this is a high risk because we want to ensure that our data is being secured and encrypted in event of a data breach. If that data was breached, in order to be able to even get the information, you would have to decrypt it from it being encrypted. So describe the potential security risk. We'll just say potential data leakage and no protection. So now we want to rate our impact level and likelihood level. So remember, this is on a scale from 1 to 4, and critical and very likely will probably be our highest. So because we have no encryption whatsoever, I'm going to go with critical. Let's start lower. We'll go with high for significant impact, and then the chances of this happen is almost certain. So let's go ahead and add that as a risk. See what we get. And it looks like that is a perfect assessment, and we can see our risk score. So keep in mind we get our risk score by multiplying our impact times our likelihood number. So because we have an impact of 3, we're going to multiply that by the likelihood of 4, which is how we get the risk score of 12 out of 16. All right, question 2. What kind of access controls do you have to ensure data is accessed only by authorized people? So, off the bat, access controls is what we want to ensure that only people that need to access certain data or have access to certain things have access to certain things. So, we don't want someone with someone with confidential information who's just a regular user and doesn't really need information or doesn't need access to that confidential information. So we would want something like separation of duties or even least of privilege so they only have access and know the things that they need to have access to based on their job. So data can be accessed by all people in the organization. This is absolutely no. We don't want somebody in HR having access to, let's say, all accounts to be able to add and remove accounts. We don't want that. So this is where we would want least of privs implemented. And I would probably go for impact level. We can go critical because that's critical. We don't want that at all. For whatever reason, a person in HR or even IT support, because a lot of attacks happen through IT support. If someone in IT support gets compromised and they have access to all this other stuff within the organization, once that attacker has compromised someone in IT support and they have access to everything, it's a wrap. So we're going critical here, and then the likelihood, let's go with possible and see what we get. So we have your assessment indicates significantly lower than expected. So we basically basically means we want our risk score to be a little bit higher. So let's go back in and change this to likely. Your assessment indicates lower risk than expected. All right, let's go back in and see if we need to go and just go all the way, fours and fours. All right, and now we have a perfect assessment. So this also tells us as far as what the question is and what the vendor needs to be evaluated at. We also can see that from an impact and likelihood, maybe our assessment needs to be reevaluated and what areas we need to kind of revisit and recalculate. All right, and we have one more question. How long do you keep client data after the case is closed? So ultimately, you do not want to keep data longer than you need to. Once you're done with this data, you want to go ahead and just dispose of it because you're done with it. You don't need to keep holding it. You don't need to pose a further risk to this data at all. So 2 to 1 month, that's kind of a long time because once you've closed this client's case, you really don't need it anymore. I would probably say maybe the longest you want to keep it is a week, if that much, but 2 to 1 month is way too long. We'll just say, and we can do, let's go critical and possible for now and see what we get. So our assessment could approve. Your assessment indicates lower risk than expected. So, what that basically means is our security score needs to be higher. So let's go ahead and try likely instead of possible. And now we have a perfect assessment. Awesome. All right, we'll do complete assessment for this particular vendor, and now we'll go move over to the next vendor. So we'll go question 1. So this is back on the data transit and data at rest encryption. So this particular vendor has AES-256 for data in transit and AES-256 for data at rest. That is exactly what we wanted. So we probably can go anything. I think they kind of met that, but the likelihood of something to occur, let's try and see if that is anything. So our score is correct, but our impact and likelihood will need to adjust. So let's go ahead and change the high impact and make the likelihood of that to happen be low, because technically they have everything in place, so the likelihood of that happening would be low. All right, so question number 2 would be based on access controls due to authorized people. So that vendor answered data can be accessed only on a need to know basis. So this is a little bit better than not having anything at all. Basically, this says only people that need to know this information has access to this information. So that's something that is good, and that's something we want to hear. Need to know is good, but we want to ensure least of priv. In this case, let's try critical and very likely and see what we get. So it is higher than expected, which I figured. Because they have need to know, let's go moderate impact possible. The score is correct, but the impact and likelihood needs to adjust. So if we want a score of 2, we have to basically understand the impact of this and the likelihood of this. So if we have need to know, what is the likelihood that we will be at risk of this? Let's try 4 and 1. All right, so now we have a perfect assessment. So the impact of this would be critical, but the likelihood of this happening would be a rare occurrence due to having the need to know basis implemented. And now we go to question 3. How long do you keep data after the client has closed this case? Less than a week is absolutely superb, and we're keeping it no longer than we need to keep it for. So let's go ahead and go and we want to go critical and probably unlikely. It's a rare occurrence that anything will happen because we are keeping this data less than we need to keep it. Perfect timing. Awesome. All right, we'll complete the assessment and we have one more vendor. So let's go to question 1. They have data in transit and also data at rest. So we can probably say encryption. And we also had another vendor that had data encryption for transit and at rest. So we can just go ahead and copy what they had. So we did a impact of 3 and the likelihood of 1. And we have a perfect assessment. All right, we go to question number 2. For access controls, data can be accessed by all people on the relevant team. So relevant team, let's just say for the kicks of it, just because we don't know what relevant team really means, we can go severe impact, critical impact, and the likeliness of this happen due to them having access to the relevant team will go in like unlikely. So just after that, the score is indicated less than expected. So let's try the likelihood of being possible maybe to occur. And we have a perfect assessment. Awesome. And let's go to question number 3. How long do you keep client data after the case is closed? 2 to 1 month is absolutely crazy. I think we also had this answer in question number 1. So let's just see how we assess that. We did an impact of 4 and the likelihood of 3. Likelihood of 3. And let's do at risk. And that was a perfect assessment as well. We can go ahead and complete the assessment. And based on that assessment, we now have our risk score based on how we rated these. And based on our total score, we have one vendor that has the lowest score. And I believe we want to select the third party that has the lowest score, which in this case is Silver Dragon. And we have our flag. Let's go ahead and copy this. And this is the flag we see received after performing the security risk assessment. And what does GRC stand for? It stands for governance, risk, and compliance. I'm going to just copy this because sometimes I do spell stuff wrong. So just to make sure I'm spelling stuff right, see, governance. Just make sure we don't have no spaces. And let's hit enter. All right. So if you enjoyed this room, feel free to check out the risk management room. If you're into cybersecurity but may not want to be into the technical side, GRC is the place for you to be. Risk management is awesome as well. It still is cybersecurity. It still is understanding some security access controls, just from a different standpoint, and you're not really being so technical. There are roles in the field for you. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and see y'all for day 10.